of Cowboy Jim and the Christmas Miracle. In El Paso, Texas, on July 19th, 1932, a baby boy was born. His name was James Austin Oden. However, everyone just called him Jim. He was the first of 4 children. He had 2 sisters and 1 brother. His dad taught the cowboy way of life and shared many of his experiences with him. Jim loved everything about being a cowboy. His mother always said that he was born 100 years too late. He was a cowboy through and through. He graduated from high school and then was drafted into 1950. It's okay.
Can you see them?
Yes. In 1950, he was drafted into the Army. The Army sent him to Korea, and there he was commissioned to be the driver of an aide to a general. He was baptized there in Korea. In October of 1956, he married Barbara Louise Hickman. Back again. That right there. On July 30th, 1957, the honeymoon child was born. That was me. That's me. He raised his children in New Mexico on Wholesome Dairy / BK Farms in Anthony, New Mexico. Sometimes he would give the school kids a tour of the milk barns. He and my mom had entered the Wholesome Dairy, Surrey, and the Clydesdale Reuben in a few parades. And that Clydesdale, when he retired, he was in our corral with my horse. He was Reuben. He was a really friendly, big, old clod of a horse. He taught himself to speak Spanish. He spoke it fluently. Because he was an expert in animal husbandry and worked the dairy industry, he decided to teach it in Spanish at the prison La Tuna in Anthony, Texas, which coincidentally was built in 1932, the same year my dad was born. He loved to hunt rabbit, deer, elk, antelope, and bear. He was an excellent tracker. He loved the thrill and challenge of the hold way of hunting. In 1974, a big change in all of our lives. After 18 years of marriage, Mom and Dad divorced. He got married again and was married for 10 years, but that one didn't last either. So Cowboy Jim decided to go to Alaska to become a gold miner. I was always glad that these pictures weren't developed in Smell a Picture because he looks really ripe. Even though he had an incredible experience as a gold miner, he didn't get rich doing it. He also was very upset when he realized the damage that was being done to the land due to the bulldozers and all the equipment. So he came back to South Texas and started over again. He began working for his brother's business at Oden Contracting. Then he met his last wife, Sonia. During that time, he joined the Elks Lodge. He taught himself to dance. He was in his late 50s then. He worked his way up the ranks until he became the Grand Poobah of the Elks. He started smoking cigarettes as a young man. He only smoked the kind without filters. It seemed as though he always had one lit. Even though he had chronic asthma since a child, he smoked about 3 packs a day, which caused him to get emphysema. Therefore, for the last few years, he had to have an oxygen canister on his hip. He was an avid reader. He once read a whole encyclopedia and the Webster's Dictionary from cover to cover. He loved reading Western novels and science fiction and just about anything in between. He had an excellent vocabulary and couldn't stand it when I messed up the English language. If I ever asked him what the definition of a word was or how something was spelled, his standard answer was, "Arlene, get that dictionary and look it up now." He could talk to anybody about almost everything except about Jesus. He could not accept that Jesus was the only way to eternal life in heaven, and I was truly concerned about his soul. I prayed for his salvation many times over the years during my own roller coaster ride with Jesus. In the spring of 2004, all of the Odin family and his friends were given the invitation to come to Harlingen, Texas, to celebrate his 72nd birthday. I was clearly impressed by the Lord to get the book, The Case for Christ, written by Lee Strobel. I kept putting it off until one day in May, I was at Walmart at the checkout station, and there was the book sitting on that table. I just laughed and I looked upward and I said, "Here's my sign, Lord." So I bought it and took it home and began to read it. I knew within the first few pages why God wanted that particular book for my dad to read. Like I said before, Cowboy Jim had a huge vocabulary, and so does Lee Strobel. I knew that just because of the big words that were used, that he would be encouraged to keep reading. I read the whole book. It is an excellent book. In July, when it was time to go to the valley, I prayed, "Lord, I want to witness my faith to my daddy and ask him to read the book, but you know how he makes me feel like I'm just a little 12-year-old girl. Please open the door, give me the boldness and the right words to say." The party was great. So many friends and family we hadn't seen in years showed up to celebrate. The highlight of the event for me was when Cowboy Jim and his brother, Uncle Lewis, sang old songs together. Dad really did have a good voice, and Uncle Lewis did too. One night after the big reunion, Dad, my 2 brothers, and I sat together at the kitchen table, and we straight up asked him, what did he want done when he passed? He said he wanted his viable body parts to be donated and the rest to be cremated. He wanted an Elks ceremony, and he wanted us to take his cremains to his favorite place in the New Mexican desert called the Malpais. Dad wanted to take me to the Elks Lodge to see it. It was the last morning before we were going to come back home. He showed me around. And then we went into the bar, and he drank him a cup of coffee and me some Dr. Pepper. I found out that Dad and Sonia had been going to church for 5 or 6 years. Somehow the door got opened about Jesus. I can't remember what I had said, but Jesus said, "Arlene, There was never any proof that Jesus was who he said he was. And I replied, Daddy, Jesus didn't leave his body here. At first, I thought my reply was like a dumb blonde joke or something, but I noticed that it was the first time in my entire life that he didn't have a comeback. So then I broke the silence and said, Dad, there were thousands of proofs that Jesus is who he said he is. And the Lord told me to bring a book to you for you to read. You've asked me to read books before, and I've read them. Now I'm asking the same of you. Promise me that you'll read it, and what you do with it is between you and God. He said he would, and when we got back to the house, I gave it to him. Nothing else was needed to be said. He had promised me that he would read it, and I knew that he would keep his promise. In September, I got a phone call from Sonia, and she said that my dad had gotten rebaptized. When he got on the phone, I asked him about it. He said that he rededicated his life. That wasn't exactly what I was hoping to hear. I wanted to hear him say that he had asked Jesus into his life, or to be a savior, or something to that effect. So I just kept on praying. I believed that something deeper had to develop in Cowboy Jim. On Wednesday, December 22nd, I was at choir practice at Life Church for the Christmas Eve service. Brother David came to me and said that I needed to go home, that my dad was in the hospital, and that I needed to call my brother. So I did just that. Curtis told me that Dad had collapsed and that the EMTs revived him, but that he was in a coma and they didn't expect him to live long. I was going to get on a plane the next day to Harlingen. So after the call, I stood outside on my back steps and I talked to Jesus. I asked him to let Dad live long enough for the boys to be able to say their goodbyes. I didn't need that. All I needed was to know that I know that I know that my daddy was going to be with him. So that was his obituary. God answered my prayers. For my brothers, they got to be with him just as I had asked. Dad passed away sometime after 2 a.m. on December 23rd, 17 years ago today. Christmas Eve. As for the part of my prayer for me, that part was really amazing. I got on the airplane that Christmas Eve and flew to Harlingen just as we had planned. I went to Dad's house, and some other family members were beginning to gather up there as well. The next day was Christmas Eve. And that night, was when the miracle began to happen. It was after 11 p.m. when we noticed something was happening in the atmosphere. It was snowing. It was actually snowing in Harlingen, Texas. All of us were outside looking at the falling snow. We were amazed, but we just knew that it would never stick. We said our good nights, but when we woke up on Christmas morning, we were all awestruck by what we saw. There was snow everywhere, and people outside having snowball fights and making snow angels and snowmen. Most of the people had never seen snow, ever. It made national news. Fox and CNN said that it had not snowed in the Rio Grande Valley at any time since 1885, and that in the 150 years of weather record keeping, this was the first Christmas snow ever. The next day was Sunday. and we had a small family memorial. My Uncle Lewis officiated it for us. He did a wonderful job sharing memories of Dad, but at the end he said, "I've heard many of you saying that it would be just like Jim to send us that snow." Then he said, "I want to leave you with this. In the 1800s, there was a legend that when a true cowboy passed on, it would bring on the snows." Then he asked if there was anyone else who wanted to say something. A man in the back of the room said that he had something to say. He said, "I was with Jim the day before he collapsed. I told him that the weathermen were forecasting snow flurries, and he looked at me and said, 'I'll be dead and gone before it ever snows in this valley.' Right then and there, the Lord let me know that if my dad had denied Jesus, he never would have been honored to fit the legend of the true cowboy, and we would not have received this Christmas snow miracle. My prayer had been answered in a way that only God could do. He is the God of the miraculous." That was enough for me to know. However, God was not finished. The next week, Cowboy Jim was honored again. He was featured on a front page in the Valley Morning Star newspaper. They talked about his life as a cowboy and a gold miner. I have this. He's on both sides. Then on Saturday, we went to the Elks Lodge for the honorary ceremony that he requested. Before they did their thing, my brothers and I were allowed to speak a little so we could share some of our memories. I shared a few of mine and then told them a short synopsis of why the whole Rio Grande Valley was blessed with the Christmas snow miracle. After the service, I was standing outside, and a short, white-haired old man walked up and introduced himself to me. He said, I was your dad's Sunday school teacher for 6 years. I witnessed Jesus to him every time I saw him. And it just went right out over his head, and we both swooped our arms over our heads, and we laughed at the same time. Then he said, but something changed in September. He said before he always had some kind of argument or something to say whenever I answered the question he had asked. But then finally, he quit arguing. He began to understand. He said, girl, I want you to know that he got it. He really got it. I truly believe, he said, that he is with the Lord. So I asked Sonia if Dad ever read that book. She said he read it over and over and over again. 4 or 5 times, she said, at least. I knew it. He had kept his promise to me. 2 of Cowboy Jim's requests had been fulfilled. The Elks ceremony was done, and also about what he wanted done with his body. His lungs were donated to science for the study of effects of emphysema due to smoking. His corneas went to someone, and his skin went to burn victims. The rest was cremated and returned to my brother. The last part of his request had to wait for a few months. In April 2005, a bunch of family went west from San Antonio to Texas to Anthony, New Mexico, to meet up with some of Dad's old friends. There were only a few people who knew how to get to that specific place where he wanted us to go. A couple of the men lived in other states. One was really sick in bed, but there was still one of his friends who was available to be our guide. So with him in the lead, our convoy headed out. Cowboy Jim loved this desert land more than any other. He loved everything about it. We also met some four-legged friends on our trip. I thought it was really apropos because Cowboy Jim had spent so many years of his life learning about and taking care of cattle. Finally, after about 35 miles of winding around desert trails, we found the spot. Look, in the middle of the desert where cactus and sagebrush, tumbleweeds, small mesquite trees and bushes are, there stood this huge evergreen tree. It was the only one of its kind. This was his happy place, and now would be his resting place. The men began to work together, putting everything in place to make a memorial that would make the old cowboy proud. This is my dad's friend and our guide, and my baby brother, my cousin. And that's family and friends. His memorial is definitely befitting an old cowboy. I don't think these pictures show all the parts to it, so here's let's see. So here's a picture that was taken. Yeah,
There we go.
there. It was taken in my brother's yard, how he put it together to see how it would look. The Texas rock right there. This is what let's see, I asked Jesus for a scripture to write on the Texas rock. This is what he gave to me, so I wrote it out as a prayer. Lord, now let me depart in peace according to thy word, for my eyes have seen thy salvation. Luke 2:29 and 30. When everything was just right, we played a song. We had an instrumental CD of Amazing Grace using bagpipes. Cowboy Jim loved bagpipe music. After putting a couple of handfuls of his ashes on the memorial place, we walked up the natural lava rock staircase behind it. We didn't think to take a picture of that. Anyway, this is where we chose to throw the ashes out into the wind. That was me and Curtis. Travis threw out the last handful. Now look closely. Can you see it? Can you see the cowboy? Can you see his hat? Look below the cowboy. Can you see the cross? This picture amazed me. We didn't see it at the moment, but now when I look, I see it every time. Remember my prayer? I needed to know that I know that I know. 2 Corinthians 13:1. The Berean Study Bible states it this way. This is the third time I'm coming to you. Every matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3. The first witness, the Christmas snow miracle. The second witness, the Valley Morning Star front page article. The third witness, the Sunday school teacher. And the extra witness for good measure was the cowboy and the cross and the ashes. According to the signs of the last days we are living, Jesus is coming to get his bride sooner than we can even imagine. Having said that, I'll see you soon, Dad.